The room felt colder than it should have. Not from the air, but from the silence. Every bench was filled, every eye fixed on the man standing alone at the defense table. When the metal cuffs closed around his wrists, a quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. Some people leaned forward. Others nodded as if this was exactly how the story was supposed to go. Decorated Black SEAL sniper, now restrained in public, reduced to a case number and a charge sheet. To them, this was a fall from grace. To him, it was just another test of control. He did not react. Years of training had taught him how to master stillness, how to slow his breathing when everything around him demanded a response. His posture remained straight, shoulders set, eyes forward. He had stood in places far more dangerous than this. Places where noise meant survival and silence meant discipline. Compared to those moments, this room was just another environment to read and endure. The judge entered, the gavel sounded, and the process moved on as if the weight of his past meant nothing. The prosecutor spoke clearly, confidently, outlining events in a way that sounded clean and simple. Decisions made in seconds were stretched into paragraphs. Context disappeared. What remained was a version of events that fit neatly into legal language. The man in cuffs listened without interruption. He had learned long ago that arguing too soon often weakened the truth. In the gallery, reactions varied. Some faces showed curiosity, others quiet judgment. A few people looked uncomfortable, as if unsure whether they were witnessing justice or something else entirely. No one spoke for him. No mention was made of the missions that never made headlines, the teammates who trusted him with their lives, or the discipline it took to walk away from moments that could have defined him forever. None of that fit neatly into the room. As the prosecutor paused and the judge prepared to continue, the atmosphere settled into something heavy and final. It felt like the story had already been written. Cuffs seemed to say everything the room needed to hear. No one noticed the door at the back until it opened. And in that brief moment before anyone turned around, the course of the day quietly began to change. The sound of the door opening was soft, almost polite, but it carried across the room like a sudden shift in weather. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-thought. Even the judge paused, hand hovering above the bench. A four-star general stepped inside, his uniform precise, his presence undeniable. The courtroom, moments ago so certain of its direction, seemed to hold its breath. He walked forward with measured steps, not looking around for attention, not acknowledging the stares. It had a gravity of its own, and everyone in the room felt it. Lawyers straightened in their seats. A bailiff instinctively stood taller. The general's gaze moved briefly to the men in cuffs, and in that glance was something unmistakable. Recognition. Respect. When he asked permission to speak, it was not a request born of uncertainty. It was protocol. Once granted, he began calmly, explaining his role and why he was there. His voice carried without effort. He did not argue facts. He provided context. He spoke of operations that could not be fully discussed, of decisions made under conditions few in the room could imagine. He described the defendant not as a headline, but as a professional who had carried responsibility when the cost of failure was measured in lives. As he spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The prosecutor's confident posture softened. The gallery listened differently now. The general described the weight placed on snipers, the discipline required to hold fire as much as to act. He spoke of orders given with incomplete information, of trust placed in individuals because they had proven, again and again, that they would choose restraint when others might not. The man in cuffs remained still, but his eyes lowered slightly, not in shame, in acknowledgement. He had never needed public praise. Service had taught him that recognition often comes quietly, if at all. Hearing his actions described with accuracy, not simplification, was enough. The general finished by reminding the court that accountability mattered, but so did understanding. Justice, he said, was strongest when it considered the full weight of responsibility carried by those asked to act on behalf of others. When he stepped back, the room did not immediately move on. Silence returned, but it was no longer cold. A thoughtful story, once so simple, had become something far more complex. The judge leaned back slowly, eyes fixed on the file in front of him, but his attention was no longer on the words alone. What had just been said lingered in the room, pressing against the walls, against every assumption made earlier that morning. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of judgment. It felt like a place of reckoning. Defense finally spoke, but their tone was different now. Measured, grounded. They did not exaggerate. They did not dramatize. They simply connected the facts to the context that had been missing. Decisions that once sounded reckless now appeared disciplined. Silence that had seemed suspicious now looked intentional. The man in cuffs had not acted outside his training. He had acted because of it. The judge asked questions. Careful ones. Not the kind meant to corner, but the kind meant to understand. Each answer peeled away another layer of assumption. The prosecutor listened, no longer interrupting, no longer rushing. What had entered the room with the general was not influence. It was clarity. Finally, the judge nodded once and addressed the courtroom. The hearing would be paused. Evidence would be reviewed again. Orders would be examined with full context. The cuffs were removed, not with ceremony, but with quiet purpose. The sound they made when released was small, yet it carried more weight than when they were first applied. The man flexed his hands slightly, a habit formed long ago, then returned them to his sides. He did not look around for reactions. He did not smile. Relief was not something he displayed easily. Years of service had taught him that outcomes mattered more than emotions. People began to file out. Conversations remained hushed. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked back at him with new expressions. Not sympathy. Respect. The general paused beside him briefly, offering a nod. No words were needed. They both understood what had been protected in that room today was more than one man's record. When the courtroom finally emptied, the men stood alone for a moment, absorbing the quiet. They had faced danger without fear, but being misunderstood had always been heavier. Walking out, free for now, he understood something deeply. Strength is not proven by how hard you fight, but by how steady you remain when the world decides who you are before hearing the whole truth.